Zara's fingertips barely grazed Seoljin's chest, and the man completely forgot how to breathe. One small touch. That was all it took for something behind his carefully constructed walls to crack wide open. His hand found her waist before his mind could stop it, pulling her close like letting go would cost him something he didn't know he had. "Don't move," he said, voice dropping to something raw and rough, and his eyes told her everything his pride refused to say. This wasn't coldness, this was a man losing a battle he never agreed to fight. He leaned close enough that his lips almost touched hers and whispered like a man warning himself, "Tell me to stop." But before the words could save him, something inside him gave way entirely. His breath broke hard as he kissed her deep, the way a man kisses when he's been starving and only just realized it. But before we fall completely into this fire, let's go back to where it all started. Welcome to Neon and Gold Stories, where power meets passion and hearts refuse to follow the rules. If you love emotional roller coasters, slow burn romance, and twists that will leave you speechless, please subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who needs a good story tonight. And drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and whether you think Seoljin will choose the empire or the woman who just made him feel human again. Seoljin Kwon was in the middle of a call worth $40 million when his second phone lit up. Not his business phone, not the one his team used to reach him at midnight, his private line, the one that existed for exactly 3 people in the world. His eyes dropped to the screen and his chest went cold. Grandmother. He held up one finger to silence the room and answered with the composure of a man who had been trained since childhood never to let anything shake him. "Yes, Haraboji." Her voice came through clean and sharp, the way a blade sounds when it meets bone. "Come now." Nothing else. No reason, no warmth, no explanation. The line went dead and the room felt smaller suddenly. Seoljin handed the call off to his deputy without explanation, buttoned his jacket, and walked out with his jaw set so tight it ached. His assistant scrambled to her feet. "Sir, you have 3 back-to-back meetings and the Tokyo group flies in at—" "Cancel all of it," Seoljin said without slowing. She stared after him like she'd just watched a natural disaster choose a direction and walk toward it calmly. In 30 minutes, Seoljin stepped through the iron gate of his grandmother's estate. Kwon Suk-ja was already seated in the receiving room when he entered, back perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap, looking exactly like a woman who had never in her life apologized for anything. She didn't rise, she didn't smile, she simply looked at him the way a jeweler examines a stone, checking for cracks. "Grandmother." He bowed once, controlled. She didn't respond with pleasantries. She never did. She looked at him long and quiet, then spoke. "You will be married within 3 days." The silence after those words was extraordinary. Seoljin blinked once, and a short laugh escaped him before he could catch it, the involuntary kind, the kind that happens when reality says something your mind refuses to process. His grandmother didn't react. Not one flicker. Seoljin straightened. "I won't be marrying anyone." Kwon Suk-ja's expression stayed as still as carved stone. "You will." "I have no reason to," Seoljin said carefully, voice low and even. "Marriage is not in my plans for this year or any year following it." His grandmother tilted her head slightly. "Your plans," she said, "are not the plan." "Grandmother." He kept his tone respectful, barely. "You cannot simply walk into my life and rearrange it." She raised one hand and his sentence dissolved in the air. That gesture alone carried decades of authority in it. "You will marry in 3 days," she said again, the repetition itself a warning. "Because I have said so." Seoljin exhaled through his nose. "No." Kwon Suk-ja studied him without blinking. She was waiting, he knew, for the moment he remembered who was sitting across from him. Then she spoke again. "If you refuse, your shares transfer to Park Hyun-woo." The room went quiet in a different way. Seoljin didn't move, but something inside him went absolutely still the way things go still right before they break. His grandmother's voice continued, unhurried and merciless. "Your position goes with them." Seojin's jaw flexed hard. That's not legally possible. I made it legally possible, she replied. Park Hyun-woo, Sejin had known the man since childhood, and that was exactly the problem. Hyun-woo was the type who wore tailored clothes and still looked like a man who cut corners. He smiled too easily and thought charm was the same as capability. Handing him any real power would be like giving a child a loaded weapon and calling it a gift. You would destroy what I've spent 15 years building, Sejin said quietly. You would hand it to a man who would ruin it inside of a year. His grandmother's eyes held steady. The papers are already signed, she said. Conditional transfer. Marry, and what is yours stayed as yours. Refuse, and Hyun-woo walks in Monday morning. Sejin's fingers pressed flat against his thighs. He forced his voice to stay even. Who? He said finally. Who is she? His grandmother reached beside her cushion and produced a thin cream envelope. She slid it across the low table and tapped it once. Sit. He sat. She opened the envelope and removed a photograph. She placed it in front of him with the precise care of someone placing a chess piece. Her name is Zara Mensah. Sejin looked down. A young Ghanaian woman looked back at him from the photograph. She wasn't posing. She wasn't performing beauty for the camera. She was simply there, the way honest things simply are. Her eyes were calm but carrying something heavy behind them, like grief that had moved in and never left. Her features were striking without trying, the kind of beauty that didn't ask for your attention but held it anyway. Sejin stared longer than he intended to. Then he looked up. Why her? His grandmother's voice shifted, not softer exactly, but different. Her father was owed a debt I have carried for over 20 years. Sejin's brows drew together. What kind of debt? Kwon Sukja's eyes moved away from him briefly, traveling somewhere he couldn't follow. I was in Accra, she said slowly. A deal I had trusted fell apart in ways I did not anticipate. People I had called partners turned against me overnight. Sejin leaned forward slightly despite himself. I was trapped, she continued, her voice measured like she was counting out each word carefully. Isolated, the kind of situation where options disappear one by one and the end becomes visible. She paused. And then Samuel Mensah appeared. Sejin didn't speak. He had no reason to involve himself, his grandmother said. None. Getting involved could have made him a target too. He was a businessman, not a soldier. He owed me absolutely nothing. Sejin watched her face. He helped you. Kwon Sukja nodded once. I offered him money immediately after, a significant sum. She pressed her lips together. He refused. Sejin blinked. I offered partnerships, access to connections that would have elevated his entire operation for the next decade. A pause. He refused those, too. Sejin stared at her. Then what did he want? His grandmother's mouth formed a thin line, the expression of someone about to say something that had cost them pride. One promise, she said, that if he ever needed help, I would provide it. Sejin sat back. That was the entire negotiation? His grandmother nodded. He wanted no title, no money, no piece of my world. He only wanted my word. Sejin looked back at the photograph. Zara Mensah. Quiet eyes and something behind them that looked like exhaustion born from surviving things that should have broken her. He pushed the photo slightly, as if distance could stop whatever feeling was trying to form behind his ribs. And now you want to repay a dead man by ordering me to marry his daughter. Sejin's expression sharpened. Not only to repay him, to protect her. Sejin's eyes flicked up. From what? Kwon Suk-ja's voice dropped in temperature. Samuel died 4 months ago. Something tightened in Sejin's chest. How? It doesn't matter how he died, she said firmly. What matters is that he is gone, and the vultures descended the moment he stopped breathing. Business partners who smiled at him for years are now dismantling his company piece by piece. People who ate at his table are stealing from his name. Sejin listened without interrupting. And she's alone in it, his grandmother finished.
without protection strong enough to make them stop. Sejin exhaled slowly. Send lawyers, he said. Deploy financial pressure. Use the family's influence to freeze the assets they're touching. Why does marriage enter into this at all? Kwansuk-ja looked at him like he was being deliberately slow. Because influence can be worked around, she said. Lawyers can be counted. Money can be moved and hidden and stolen again. She leaned forward slightly, and even in her old age she managed to make the movement feel commanding. But a public marriage to you makes her untouchable. It forces every man trying to pick at her father's bones to reconsider the cost of continuing. It gives her a shield that money alone cannot buy. Sejin let out a quiet, humorless sound. So I am the shield. His grandmother didn't soften the response. Yes. Sejin looked back at the photograph again. Zara didn't look like someone playing games. She didn't look like someone who had engineered this situation. She looked like someone who had been handed one loss after another and was still, somehow, standing. He pushed the photo back. Does she know? His grandmother met his eyes. She knows enough. Does she want this? A small pause settled between them, the kind that speaks clearly. His grandmother chose her words carefully. She wants her father's name to survive, she said. She wants to live without being buried. Sejin's throat tightened. He stood. 3 days is not enough time for a person to prepare for something like this. Kwansuk-ja watched him, unmoved. Then move quickly, she said. He looked at the photograph one last time before leaving the room. The worst part wasn't the 3-day deadline. The worst part was the quiet knowledge settling in his chest that Zara Mensah wasn't his enemy, and he had no idea yet how dangerous that realization was going to become.
Sejin didn't sleep that night. He lay in his penthouse with the city glowing 40 floors below him and stared at the ceiling like it owed him an explanation. A forced marriage, a stranger coming to live in his home, a grandmother who had just reordered his entire life without flinching. He made a decision before the sun came up. He would handle this the way he handled everything that threatened to disrupt him. Clean lines, clear rules, no confusion about what this was or wasn't. By the time his assistant called the next afternoon to tell him she had arrived, Sejin was already at his window, composure in place like armor. When he opened the door and saw her, something shifted very slightly in his chest, and he immediately resented it. Zara Mensah stood in his doorway with a carry-on beside her and a bag across her body. No fanfare, no performance of confidence, no testing the space to see how much she could claim. She stood like someone who had learned to take up exactly as much room as she was given, and nothing more. Her eyes were tired in a way that had nothing to do with the flight. They were tired the way eyes get when a person has been trying to hold themselves together for months. "Mr. Kwan," she said softly. Her English carried the rhythm of home, warm underneath the formality. "Thank you for receiving me." He stepped aside. "Come in." She rolled her bag in quietly. She didn't look around at the penthouse with hungry eyes. She didn't react to the space or what it communicated about money. She moved carefully, like a guest who understood the difference between being invited and belonging. She stopped in the center of the living room and waited, hands wrapped around her bag strap. Sejin closed the door and turned to face her. He didn't offer tea. He didn't ask about the flight. The warmth required for those gestures wasn't something he could locate. He simply said, "Sit." She sat at the edge of the couch without settling into it. Sejin remained standing. He always made sure he was standing when he needed the upper position. He looked at her directly. "I want us to be clear with each other from the beginning," he said. Zara looked up at him slowly. "I understand," she said. "Good." He laid it out without sentiment. She would have financial security, safety, protection over her father's business. In public, she would appear as his wife when the situation required it. She nodded to each condition with the quiet agreement of someone who had already done the emotional work of accepting this before walking through his door. And that bothered him more than a fight would have. He added, "We will not live as a real couple. Separate rooms, separate personal lives. This arrangement exists for a specific purpose and no other."
This time, Zara didn't nod immediately. She raised her eyes and looked at him fully, the way she hadn't quite done yet. When she spoke, her voice held no drama, only honesty sitting plainly in the open. "I'm not here for romance, sir. My father is 4 months in the ground, and I am still learning how to breathe around the space he left." Sejin's jaw tightened slightly. Zara continued, steady and direct. "I didn't come here because I chase money or position. I came because I want my father's name to survive him." She stopped, chose her next words with care. "That is all I want from this." Sejin stood very still. He had prepared for manipulation, for performance, for quiet strategy dressed up as simplicity. He hadn't prepared for this, for someone speaking the truth plainly because they didn't have the energy left to do otherwise. Something moved in him that he immediately shut a door on. He cleared his throat. "All right," he said, back to ice. "Then we understand each other. Your room is the 3rd door on the left." Zara stood. "Thank you." She picked up her bag and hesitated for one moment at the hallway entrance before she turned back, just slightly. "Mr. Kwan." He looked at her. Her voice was careful and quiet. "I know this wasn't your choice. It wasn't mine either." She held his gaze for a moment. "But I'm not here to make your life harder." Then she disappeared down the hall. Sejin stood in his living room long after the door of her room had closed. He had come into this with categories: deal, transaction, obligation. But Zara Mensah had just walked into his home and complicated every single one of them without even trying, and he didn't have the first idea what to do about that. The next 2 days moved with the mechanical efficiency Sejin preferred. Meetings, approvals, conference calls, decisions. His life in its familiar shape. And yet it was different now because there was someone in it. He didn't see Zara often. She seemed to understand the kind of silence that belonged to a space and moved within it carefully. But they crossed paths in the small ways that happen when 2 people occupy the same rooms. One evening, he came out of his study past midnight and found her at the kitchen island with a glass of water and her hands wrapped around it like she was cold from the inside. She looked up quickly. "Good evening." He looked at the clock. "It's past 1. She glanced down at her hands. "I know. Sleep and I are not on speaking terms right now." That sentence stayed with him after he walked away. Another time, he came through the living room and noticed a small photograph propped against the base of a lamp near the couch. A man with a wide, generous smile and his arm around a younger version of Zara, who was laughing at something off camera. Her father, clearly. Sejin left it exactly where it was and pretended he hadn't noticed how much it affected him to look at it. Then the 3rd day arrived, and it arrived hard. The wedding was arranged with the cold precision of a board meeting. Kwan Suk-ja had planned everything in advance. Sejin stood in place in a dark suit, face carrying nothing. Zara stood a careful distance away in a white dress that made no demands. It wasn't ostentatious, it was simply beautiful, the way she was simply beautiful, without effort or announcement. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, not from excitement, from the same quiet fortitude that kept her standing through things designed to knock her over. When the officiant spoke, Sejin responded on cue, controlled, precise, correct. Zara did the same. No trembling, no tears. The determination of someone enduring, which is its own kind of courage. And then came the instruction to kiss the bride. Sejin turned to face her. Zara lifted her face slowly, her expression braced, the look of someone expecting to be handled without care. Something about that expression pressed against a place in his chest he preferred to keep untouched. He leaned in and kissed her briefly, barely a moment, then stepped back. A stamp, a formality. Zara breathed in slowly and stood taller, like people do when they have survived something they weren't sure they could. Back at the penthouse, Sejin walked directly to his office and opened his laptop. Numbers, reports, projections. Safe territory. He had barely settled when his phone began going off. He glanced at it and went very still. The name on the screen was Jian. He stared for a moment, then opened the messages. The first one read, "You actually went through with it." The second, "She's nothing, a strategy your grandmother forced on you." The third, "When you're tired of playing house, call me." Sejin sat back in his chair and stared at the screen with the blank expression of a man making a decision. Then he deleted them, one by one, without a single reply. He was setting the phone down when it rang, the private line again. He answered immediately. "Yes, grandmother." Her voice came through with an edge he couldn't identify. "Tonight," she said, "be kind to her." Sejin's eyes narrowed. "I have a great deal of work to—" "She is alone in a foreign city," Kwan Suk-ja said, "married to a stranger. Her father is gone. Be kind to her, Sejin, even if kindness is all you can offer." The line ended. Sejin stood motionless for a long moment. Then he stood up, left his desk, and walked down the hall. He stopped outside Zara's door. He stood there longer than made sense. Then he knocked. Her voice came softly. "Come in." He pushed the door open. Zara was sitting on the edge of the bed, hands pressed between her knees, eyes red in a way that was clearly not new. When she saw him, she tried to assemble something composed, but the pieces weren't quite cooperating. The room was neat. She hadn't spread herself into the space at all. One open bag near the wall, a few things folded on the chair, like she was living lightly enough to leave if she had to. "Are you all right?" The question came out quieter than he intended. Zara looked at him. "I'm fine," she said, and both understood it wasn't true. Sejin stepped inside and closed the door. He moved closer, but not close, a careful distance, and stood. The silence held. Then Zara's breath broke quietly. She didn't make a performance of it. She pressed her eyes shut, and 2 tears found their way down anyway. "I'm sorry," she whispered immediately. "I know this is not what you signed up for. I'm not usually—" "Stop." His voice came sharp, and she froze. He caught himself and softened it. "Stop apologizing." Zara blinked at him. He moved then, settling himself on the far side of the bed, enough space to be appropriate, enough presence to mean something. He looked at his own hands for a moment. Then he said, "Tell me about him."
Zara's head came up. "About who?" "Your father." She looked at him like she was checking whether he meant it. Something in his face must have convinced her. She took a breath. "My father," she started slowly, then gathered momentum the way rivers do once they find their path, "was the kind of man who walked into a room and people just felt better. Not because he was powerful, because he was genuinely interested in every single person he talked to. He made you feel like you were the only one in the room." Seo-jin said nothing. "He had this laugh," Zara said, and a painful little smile crossed her face. This enormous, impossible laugh that came from his whole body. He laughed at his own jokes even before he finished telling them. My mother used to say he was the only person in the world who could find himself funny and be right. Seo-jin's brow moved almost imperceptibly. Zara continued, voice softening. "He always told me I carried too much tension. He would tap my temple with one finger and say, 'Zara, my love, you are not responsible for holding the sky in place. Let it hold itself for a while.'" She swallowed. "He was the one holding everything. I just didn't know it until he was gone, and I felt the weight of all of it fall." She looked at her hands. "The day they called me," she said more quietly, "I didn't believe it at first. I kept waiting for him to pick up the phone and laugh and tell me I had panicked for nothing." Seo-jin's throat worked. Zara let out a long, unsteady breath. "And then his business started disappearing. People who sat at his table, who called him uncle, who accepted his help when they needed it, they started treating what he built like it was available." Her voice went harder, and the grief sharpened into something that had an edge to it. "He built that with years of honest work, and they are picking it apart like it belongs to them now." Silence came. Then Seo-jin spoke without planning to. "My grandfather died when I was 16. Zara turned. He kept his eyes on the wall, not on her. "I was in the house when it happened. I tried to do CPR. I called emergency. I did everything correctly, every step in order." His voice went flat the way it goes flat around things that still have the capacity to hurt. "He died anyway." Zara looked at him like she'd seen something unexpected. "I spent the next year believing I had failed him," Seo-jin said. "That if I had been faster or done something differently—" "You were 16, Zara said, and the heat in her voice surprised him. "That is still a child." He looked at her. "In my family, I don't care what your family required of you," she said, quietly but firmly. You were a boy. That was not your responsibility to carry. Something moved across Seojin's face and then closed again. He stood up abruptly. I came because my grandmother asked me to, he said, the coldness returning like a reflex. Zara nodded quickly. I understand. He took one step toward the door and stopped. He stood with his back partially to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. The silence stretched. Then Zara said softly, Your grandmother called me earlier. Seojin went very still. She asked how you were treating me. He turned to look at her. What did you say? Zara met his eyes. I told her you were cold, she said carefully, but not cruel. There's a difference. Seojin studied her face. She continued, steadying herself. If we want this to look like a real marriage, at least on paper, it might help if we were in the same room tonight. He stared at her. Zara lifted both hands quickly. Only sleep. I'm not suggesting anything else. She stopped, then said more quietly, I don't want to be alone tonight. He should have said no. Every principle he had constructed over the past 15 years of careful, controlled, emotionally impenetrable living was pointing at the door. But his feet moved instead to the far side of the bed. He sat, then lay down. Zara did the same, keeping the width of the mattress between them. The room went quiet. Neither of them slept. The air between them was too full for sleep. Passed in the dark. Zara shifted. This is incredibly awkward, she said softly into the ceiling. Extremely, he agreed without missing a beat. She made a small sound that might have been a laugh with the joy taken out of it. Back home, we have a word for this kind of silence, the kind that happens when two people are both pretending they feel nothing. Seojin turned his head slightly. And what happens after the silence? Zara thought about it. Usually, someone cracks first and makes tea, and then you end up talking until morning about everything that was never supposed to be said. Another quiet pause. Then, without any plan or warning, Seojin let something honest out. I agreed to everything so quickly, he said. When you arrived, you didn't push back. You didn't demand anything. Zara was quiet for a moment. There was nothing to push against. Your grandmother, your resources, the situation itself. What would demanding have accomplished? He turned his head toward her. Most people would have tried. Zara exhaled. I am tired, I said simply. Tired in the way that has nothing to do with sleep. I agreed because I had no real choice. A pause settled around them. Then she added so quietly it was nearly a whisper. But it still hurts to know you didn't want me here. Something tightened in Seojin's chest, hard and sudden. I didn't say that, he said. You didn't have to say it, she replied gently. No accusation in it, just observation. He looked at her for a moment in the half-dark. You're not unwanted, he said. The words came from somewhere he hadn't expected to access. You're unexpected. Zara turned her head toward him slowly. She could see the outline of her face, the careful attention in her expression. Then she said, almost to herself, Unexpected isn't the worst thing to be. Something pulled between them then, slow and unmistakable. His hand moved, not grabbing, not certain, just offering itself in the space between them, like a question. Zara's fingers found his, warm and real. Is this all right? She asked quietly. Yes, he said, and the word cost him something valuable, and he gave it anyway. She moved closer. He met her halfway, and when they kissed, it was the gentlest thing that had ever happened in that penthouse, like two careful people discovering that warmth was something they still remembered how to make. He pulled back after a moment, breathing differently than before. His forehead was nearly touching hers. Tell me to stop, he said, and his voice was barely above silence. Zara looked at him, really looked, her eyes holding something honest and a little frightened. I can't, she whispered. He kissed her again slowly, carefully. Then he paused, searching her face with something close to reverence. Zara. She waited. "You're not used to this," he said gently. It wasn't a judgment, it was a question asking to be confirmed. She looked away for a moment, then back. "I kept myself for something real," she said quietly. He was still for a moment, then something in him settled into something careful and decided. "Then we do this right," he said. "No rushing, no pressure. You say stop, and we stop." Zara's eyes filled slightly, and she let them, not trying to manage it. "Thank you," she said, and the two words landed in him like something permanent. He held her then, gently, and the night shifted around them into something neither of them had words for, but both of them recognized. When the room finally went quiet and their breathing slowed together, Seo-jin lay on his back and stared at the ceiling. For the first time in as long as he could remember, the silence around him was not the silence of isolation, it was the silence of enough. He woke to an empty space beside him and sat up immediately, heart lurching before he could control it. The other side was cold. He was out of the room in under a minute. The sound found him first, a pan hitting something at the wrong angle, a soft exclamation in English, and something sizzling in a way that suggested the stove was confused about its purpose. He walked into the kitchen and stopped. Zara stood at the stove, wearing his gray shirt, sleeves rolled past her wrists, hair loose and unorganized, holding a spatula with the expression of someone who has been betrayed by inanimate objects. The eggs in the pan looked less like breakfast and more like a cautionary tale. She turned when she heard him and lifted her chin immediately. "Before you say anything," she said, "I want credit for the attempt." Seo-jin looked at the pan. "What happened to them?" "The heat got too personal," she said with complete dignity. He blinked once. Then he reached past her and turned off the burner with the efficiency of someone preventing a catastrophe from becoming a disaster. "Why are you cooking?" he asked, carefully not looking at the eggs again. "Because you're my husband," she said, and then cleared her throat slightly at her own word choice. "And it is morning, and in my house growing up, you did not let a person wake up alone to nothing." He looked at her in his shirt with her unsatisfactory eggs and her undefeated posture, and something moved in his chest that he didn't try to stop this time. "In my house growing up," he said carefully, "we did not cook at all. There were people for that." Zara pointed the spatula at him, "And look at how warm and connected that made you." His mouth moved before his pride could stop it. A real smile, small, briefly there, but real. Zara's eyes went wide like she had witnessed something mythological. He caught himself. "Don't make that face." "I saw it," she said. "I'm already attached." His phone rang before he could respond. His assistant's voice on the line was tight. "Sir, there is a woman in the lobby, Ji-yun. She's creating a scene and refusing to leave." Seo-jin's expression closed. The warmth left his eyes the way light leaves a room when you close the curtain, and Zara noticed immediately. Her smile settled back into something guarded. He put the phone away and looked at her. She was already pulling the hem of his shirt down, the small, unconscious gesture of someone preparing themselves. "Your ex," she said quietly. He moved toward her without thinking and held her face in both hands, gently, making her look at him. "I'll handle it," he said. "I won't leave you without knowing what's happening." Zara looked at him carefully, checking for the truth of it. He held her gaze. "You are my wife," he said. Something passed across her face, something that looked like the first tenderness she had allowed herself in months. She exhaled softly. "Say it again," she said, barely audible. He sighed like the instruction embarrassed him, but he said it. "You are my wife." Her eyes went soft and bright at once. He let go and grabbed his jacket. The lobby downstairs was performing. Ji-yun stood in the center of it like she had arrived to reclaim something that belonged to her. Hair perfect, presence aggressive, voice carrying across the marble to make sure everyone in the vicinity understood that she had opinions about his choices. When she saw him, she rushed forward. "Finally, we need to talk." "No," he said, and kept walking. She fell in step beside him. "You actually did it. You actually married some woman your grandmother imported for you." He stopped walking. He turned to face her, and the temperature in the room dropped considerably. "Be careful," he said quietly. Ji-yun laughed in a way that was working very hard. "She's nobody, Seo-jin. She doesn't fit into your world. She can't give you what I—" He looked at her for one more moment. Then he said, "She is my wife. Don't speak about her like that again." Ji-yun's composure cracked slightly. "You're choosing her over everything we—" And then she slapped him.
The sound was extraordinary in the marble lobby. No one moved. Seo-jin turned his head back to face her slowly. His expression was completely empty in the way that only happens when someone has moved past anger into something colder. If you come here again and speak about my wife with that tone, you will find out exactly how much I am willing to protect her. Security moved in from both sides. Ji-yeon was escorted out, and Seo-jin stood in the center of the lobby perfectly still until the doors closed. Then he breathed once. He had defended people before. He had used his name as a weapon before, but this was the first time it felt like protection rather than power. The first time it felt like it mattered beyond winning. Upstairs, his grandmother called before he reached his office. "I heard you named her publicly," she said. Seo-jin paused in the corridor. "Who told you that already?" She didn't answer the question. "Is this still a transaction?" she asked. Seo-jin thought about eggs that looked like punishment, hands that found his in the dark, eyes that asked him to say it again. "No," he said, "it's not a transaction anymore." A silence came over the line. Then Kwon Suk-ja made a sound he had not heard from her in years. Quiet satisfaction, just 2 syllables. Good. He almost said something sarcastic about the simplicity of her reaction. Instead, he heard something underneath it that stopped him. Exhaustion. "Grandmother." A pause. "Come. Now." And the line was gone. Something about the word now landed differently than it always had before. When he arrived at the estate, the staff moved too carefully, the careful movement of people working very hard not to alarm anyone. He entered the main room, and the change in his grandmother struck him before she said a word. Kwon Suk-ja was seated as always, straight and present, but she looked like someone borrowing strength now, like whatever she had been running on for decades was being settled up. He bowed. She looked at him. "You believe I did all of this for Mr. Mentz's memory." He held her gaze. "Didn't you?" She looked away from him for the first time, not evasively, inwardly, like she was gathering something she had put down long ago and needed to pick back up. "I did it because I wronged you," she said. Seo-jin's chest went tight. His grandmother rarely said those words. She rarely said them at all. "When your grandfather died," she said slowly, "I was in a grief I didn't know how to survive, and I turned it toward you." Seo-jin's hands went still at his sides. He remembered that year as a series of cold rooms and colder silences, and words that were used like instruments on a boy who had just tried and failed to save someone with his bare hands. "I blamed you," Kwon Suk-ja said, voice roughening, because blame gave the loss a reason, because a reason made it feel like something other than randomness. Her eyes came back to his. "I watched you close yourself off after that," she said. "I watched you become exactly the kind of man I created, precise, untouchable, alone." Seo-jin's jaw tightened. "And you thought forcing a marriage was the correction," he said. His grandmother surprised him. "I thought Zara Mensa was the kind of woman who wouldn't let you stay closed," she said simply. "I thought she was worth disturbing your peace for." He had no response to that. After a moment, she said quietly, "And Samuel, he made me promise, before I even knew who you would become, that if I ever saw young people making the same choice he and I made once, choosing safety over feeling, I would do something about it." Seo-jin looked at her. "You and her father." His grandmother's face changed just slightly, just enough. Her eyes became something more human than he had seen in 20 years. "Long ago," she said, "we were afraid of everything our families would say, of what choosing each other would cost, so we chose duty instead and called it wisdom." Seo-jin sat very still. "He still helped me years later," she said, "after everything, because his character was that kind of constant." She looked at him steadily. "He saved my life without obligation, and all he asked in return was that I not let other people waste their own." Seo-jin felt something crack open in his chest quietly, just a slow opening, like a window that had been painted shut for 15 years, finally giving way. He opened his mouth to speak, and then one of the staff came in, face pale, apologetic, words tumbling out, and Kwon Suk-ja swayed. Seo-jin was across the room before he thought about moving. He caught her before she reached the floor. She felt light in a way that frightened him, light like someone who was getting ready to put things down. "Get a doctor," he said, and his voice came out like a command, because the alternative was to fall apart. He called Zara from the car. She answered on the second ring, and before he could construct a careful sentence, it came out directly. My grandmother collapsed. We're going to the hospital. A brief silence, then, I'm ready. In the car, Zara sat beside him, and once, quietly, she put her hand on his forearm. She didn't make promises about things she couldn't control. She just put her hand there and kept it there, and he drove faster.
At the hospital, the doctors moved quickly and efficiently and told them things in careful, measured sentences that meant the situation was serious. Seo-jin sat in the private room beside the bed where his grandmother had been placed and waited with his elbows on his knees and his hands pressed together. Zara sat near him, not crowding, just present. When Kwon Suk-ja opened her eyes and found them both there, something moved across her face. She looked at Zara for a long moment. Then she reached out a hand and Zara took it without hesitation, without ceremony, like it was the most natural thing in the world. The old woman's voice came slow and careful, the way voices come when someone is spending what they have left on the things that matter. "Your father," she said, "there is something I never told anyone." Zara went still. "Samuel and I," Kwon Suk-ja said, "we loved each other once, before any of this, before wealth and family obligations and the fear of what choosing each other would cost." Zara's eyes filled instantly and silently. "We were young, and we chose what was expected of us instead," the old woman continued. "And then decades later he found me trapped and at risk, and he helped me anyway, because his love had not become cruelty just because we'd walked away from each other. It had simply become something quiet." She looked at Seo-jin. "He made me promise to help them," she said, "whoever they would be. The young people who were about to repeat what we did." Zara was holding her breath. Seo-jin felt his eyes burning and did not fight it. Kwon Suk-ja squeezed Zara's hand once. "Don't waste it," she said. She looked at Seo-jin. "Promise me." His voice broke slightly when it came. "I promise." Zara was crying openly now. "We promise," she said. "We won't waste it." Kwon Suk-ja's mouth formed something that had the shape of peace in it. "Good," she said. And then her eyes drifted, and the monitor beside her changed its sound, and people in white moved quickly, and Seo-jin didn't move at all. The funeral was large and correct and full of people who wore their grief like appropriate clothing. Important people, influential people. People who had known Kwon Suk-ja as a force and spoke of her now with the reverence reserved for things that are gone and therefore safe to admire. Seo-jin received condolences with a face that gave nothing. Thank you. Yes, she was. Thank you. Beside him, Zara stood close enough that he could feel her warmth, and he gripped her hand with a tightness she didn't question and didn't pull away from. When the private burial came, family only, the priest's final words, the final handful of earth, something inside Seo-jin gave way without permission. He went to his knees, not slowly, not with dignity, with the collapse of a man whose entire structural support system had just gone into the ground. The sound that came out of him was not the sound of a CEO. It was the sound of the 16-year-old boy who had been blamed for a death he couldn't stop and had spent the next 20 years building walls against ever feeling that again. Zara was beside him before the sound finished. She dropped down next to him and put her arms around him without asking permission, pulling him close, holding him like she could keep him from disappearing into the ground along with everything he'd been carrying. "Cry," she said into his ear. "I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere." He held onto her sleeve like an anchor, and she held him tighter. That night, the penthouse was quieter than it had ever been. Seo-jin sat on the edge of the bed like his body had forgotten the mechanics of rest. Zara sat beside him, not close enough to crowd, close enough to matter. The silence sat between them for a long time, and it was a comfortable silence now, the kind that happens between people who have been through something together and don't need words to confirm it. Zara spoke first, low and careful. "I think I am falling in love with you." Seo-jin turned to look at her, and she was already watching him with an honesty that made it impossible to look away. "I know that's too soon," she said.
I know this has all happened fast and in completely impossible circumstances, but I thought you should know." He sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "Me too." She blinked. He held her gaze. "And it frightens me," he said, "that it could be this fast, that I don't seem to be able to stop it." Zara let out a small, unsteady breath. Then she said simply, "Then we can be frightened together." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward and pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and deliberate. She rested her head against his shoulder. They stayed like that until he fell asleep, his breath evening out slowly for the first time in days. Zara stayed awake a while longer, watching the city beyond the windows, thinking about her father, thinking about a woman who had loved him across decades and oceans and circumstances, thinking about what it means to not waste the time you are given. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She frowned and opened it. 4 words. "We need to talk." She started to dismiss it. Then a second message arrived. A photograph. Seo-jin, younger, standing with a woman whose smile was wide and familiar in a way she couldn't immediately place, her arm around her, the kind of ease between them that only comes from real history. Her fingers went cold. Then the third message came. Ask him how she died. Ask him what he was protecting. Zara sat very still. Her hands were trembling lightly. She looked at Seo-jin sleeping beside her, face finally unguarded, finally soft, finally looking like a man who had chosen to let someone in, and she felt the warmth of the last several days begin to flicker under something cold, dead. Someone was dead, someone connected to him, someone connected to a past he had never mentioned. Zara looked at the photograph again. She looked at his sleeping face, and the question that formed in her chest was quiet and terrifying and would not let go. Who exactly did I marry, and what is he still carrying? And that is where we stop tonight, friends, because from this moment forward, nothing between Seo-jin and Zara gets to stay simple. Drop a comment and tell me your favorite moment in this episode and where you are watching from around the world. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who deserves a good story, because part 2 is coming, and I promise you, the truth about that photograph is going to change everything you think you know.